today we are going to be talking about Mewtwo and what it could potentially, strong emphasis on the word potentially, do in Regulation G. But just before we jump on into the main content here, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for the continued support on the channel. I'm a few days behind, but I did just hit 8,000 subscribers, which is just wild to me, and I am very appreciative of the fact that you guys have been clicking on my videos and watching my dumb face. So anyways, thank you so much. Once I figure out what I want to do, I'm probably going to be launching memberships at some point in the near future. I do have access to Super Thanks now, and I do technically have the option to start memberships. I just haven't decided on what I want to do for that. Anyways, let's jump on in to the Mewtwo talk. Mewtwo here is the OG restricted legendary, dating all the way back from Generation 1 here. It's a mono psychic type Pokemon, and it has the potential to rip through a lot of Pokemon on the field. We have 106 HP, 110 attack, 90 in both of its defenses, 154 special attack, and 130 speed. Mewtwo is a little bit on the glassier side, but having 90 in each of its defenses paired with 106 HP, there's a lot more glass cannons out there with worse stats. So Mewtwo does have a little bit of potential to get a little bit on the bulkier side, especially if you throw up a light screen or reflect to support it with its partner, or even if you have some other means of mitigating damage. As far as Mewtwo's two abilities go, you have the options of pressure and a nerve. I know, neither of these are the best abilities out there, but you gotta work with what you got, unfortunately. So that is one thing that is kind of holding Mewtwo back a little bit, but you could make a case for pressure here on this thing. There's a lot of strong hitting moves that have limited PP on them. If you max out a close combat, for example, you hit 8. Mewtwo's naturally a psychic type, so it does resist that. So you could potentially burn through short PP moves like that, especially if you have Protect on Mewtwo, or if you just manage to naturally outlive one of these attacks. It could be great. The faster you burn through those moves, the less they can use them against you. And then there's a nerve. A nerve prevents the opponent from activating their berries, so you don't have to worry about citrus berries or the pinch berries boosting up a significant portion of your opponent's HP. Incineroar, for example, loves to run that citrus berry. If you weaken it, it won't get that citrus berry, which means no burst of HP, and you might be able to flip a matchup that your opponent might be expecting to live. Now, honestly, out of the two of these abilities, I would honestly recommend pressure if you are going to run Mewtwo, since it is the default ability, and then you don't have to worry about using an ability patch on Mewtwo to get a nerve, because that is a little bit of a slap in the face. But anyways, main idea here is run the pressure, burn the PP, and hope for the best. Mewtwo is definitely going to need a bit of support to make it work, but Mewtwo does have that potential on its side. The base 154 special attack is going to be wonderful, especially if you run like a damage boosting item, say such as the Choice Specs or a Life Orb. If you wanted to, though, you could run a Clear Amulet to keep its speed stat safe. Mewtwo's base 130 speed is respectable, so making sure that you don't take a speed drop could be relatively nice at the end of the day. You could run a Focus Sash on this if you wanted to, and honestly, you could potentially make the case for an Assault Vest, since the Assault Vest would give you a 50% boost to your special defense. If you have no investment right there and you have that 110 points into your special defense, well, that's another 55 points right there. You're going to be sitting at 165 special defense, and Mewtwo can potentially then get bulky. And I don't remember if I've already mentioned it or not, but Mewtwo does get access to Calm Mind, so if you want to get really scary, you could boost up Mewtwo's special attack and its special defense at the same time with one shot. I don't know why that little bit was enough to make me stutter, but there you go. It's enough to instill enough fear into me to make me stutter. Mewtwo is also the very definition of coverage. I threw a couple of different moves onto some blank Mewtwo's just to show what it gets, because normally when you think of Mewtwo, you think insert stab psychic type attack here, whether that be Psy Strike or Expanding Force. Usually think for the second slot Shadow Ball, and then maybe for a third Aura Sphere, and then for your fourth you kind of have a little bit of a toss-up depending if you're running a choice set, you have a fourth damaging move, or if you're running Life Orb or Focus Sash, you might be running Protect to make sure that Mewtwo can survive. So the first Mewtwo here that I thought would be kind of nice to showcase some of the moves that it gets access to outside of those ones I just mentioned. We have Thunderbolt, which can also be traded out with Thunder. You have a base 90 electric type move that is reliable accuracy wise and has a minor chance of causing paralysis, which you could trade out for Thunder, which would give you an extra 20 base power. I almost said 40 because I was thinking of that 70. I saw the 70 accuracy, but if you wanted to run the Thunder, you could get the extra 20 base power right there. Maybe you're running a Rain team with Mewtwo, then you have the ability to bypass Thunder's accuracy check and just have a nice, strong, reliable attack. Or maybe you're specifically running that to help deal with a Kyogre matchup. That could be nice at the end of the day. Mewtwo gets access to Flamethrower as well, so similarly enough to potentially running into Kyogres, you could potentially run into either Koraidon or Groudon. You could get a boost to fire-type attacks. A lot of support with Groudon, you typically see like maybe Venusaur or Lilligant. Well, now you have a nice fire-type option to deal with them, but there's a better option there as well, and I'm not going to recommend Fire Blast. I will never recommend Fire Blast on Mewtwo, but you could also upgrade to Fire Blast if you wanted to. If you want to embrace the reckless Mimi side of that. Mewtwo also gets access to Energy Ball, so there's some nice grass type damage right there. Base 90 power that has a minor chance of lowering the target's special defense. And also, because why not, Mewtwo gets access to Solar Beam, so just to prove a point. If you wanted to just get rid of something right there, slap a Solar Beam, hope you run into Groudon, or bring a manual Sunsetter and go boom. I kind of want to do this now. I'm sorry. I just put that thought into my head, and now you guys have to hear that. Another option Mewtwo gets is Earth Power, which I genuinely did not know that it got access to. At least, I don't think I did. I ran this thing in Sword and Shield. I might have known back then, but anyways. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I could have just genuinely forgotten about it. But Mewtwo gets access to Earth Power, which is really nice because this can be used to hit electric types such as Miraidon, Zekrom, Raging Bolt, all for super effective damage if they don't tear it away. And then some other options for Mewtwo here is we have Ice Beam, and this is definitely the better option of bringing in case you want to run into a Groudon. You have that to hit Groudon for super effective damage. You hit Venusaur for super effective damage. Lilligant, Landorus Incarnate, and Landorus Therian are both great targets to be able to hit with that. There's a plethora of restricted dragons all waiting to eat an Ice Beam. Unless it's Kyurem. Kyurem will just kind of tolerate it, but you guys get the main point. It gets Dark Pulse here, which is some nice, reliable Dark-type damage. It has a 20% chance of making the target flinch, which nothing wrong with that. Calyrex Shadow Rider, Lunala, Necrozma, Dawnwings, they all take 4 times super effective damage from Dark Pulse, so if for some reason you didn't want to run Shadow Ball because you're worried about getting walled by the Psychic Normal type Pokemon, say such as Indeedee or Farigiraf, you could alternatively run the Dark Pulse instead of Shadow Ball so you don't have to worry about your attacks being completely walled. So you could make that case. And going back to the idea of potentially running into opposing Rain teams, or even if you just wanted to have a Rain setter next to Mewtwo, Mewtwo does get access to Hurricane, so Hurricane could be relatively nice for removing Grass-type Pokemon off of the field, especially if you're worried about Rain reducing Fire's coverage option, or rather its damage output, so you do have that Hurricane to hit grass types, and plus 30% chance to cause confusion, not the worst thing out there. And also, just because it gets Power Gem. That's mainly it for Power Gem. But anyways, let's jump into some actual stats and movesets here to talk about for Mewtwo. Alright, so the first idea I was thinking of for this Mewtwo here is a choice specs set. And let's talk about the stats here. So starting off with our speed, we'll work our way up from the bottom here. We have 228 points into our speed to bring us up to 179. This allows us to outspeed base 110 Pokemon with a beneficial nature by exactly 1 point. And the main Pokemon that stands out right there with base 110 speed is actually Ogerpon. So this can allow us to outspeed the Ogerpon and do major amounts of damage to it before it can hit us with a Terra boosted Ivy Cudgel. If it's the Heartflame Ogerpon, great. We can just absolutely annihilate that thing relatively quickly. And if it's the Wellspring Ogerpon, well, we do have Psystrike to hit it on the physical defense side instead of the specially defensive side. As far as our special defense goes, we're just going to throw 1 point into it to bring us up to 111. Similarly enough, we're going to do the same with our defense stat. And now let's talk about our special attack stat. We have a modest nature with 132 points to bring us up to 210 total. Now, as I keep pointing out, Mewtwo's base 154 special attack stat can go way higher, but we're kind of getting into overkill territory at that point. So the main reason why we've stopped at 210 is we're getting that 50% boost from the choice spec. So that's another 105 points right there. And this allows Mewtwo to have a base special attack stat that is higher than Fluttermane's to begin with, which means for comparison wise, we are still hitting harder than choice specs max special attack Fluttermane with that 210. And the only real way a choice specs Fluttermane could potentially do more damage at this point is if they have the Protosynthesis working in their favor. So Mewtwo's kind of getting the best of both worlds by having that 132 points with the modest nature into the special attack to bring us up to 210, which then allows us to put the remainder of those EVs into our HP to give us some bulk and allow us to potentially live some hits once we have a Reflect or Light Screen up on the field, or if we decided to bring either Ting Lu or Wo-Chien. Well, you probably don't want to bring Ting Lu. You guys get the idea though. If you have Wo-Chien, it might help Mewtwo live some physical attacks in the bare minimum. As far as Mewtwo's Terra type goes, we have Terra Fairy on this to drop our weakness to Ghost, grant a dark resistance while still keeping our fighting resistance, which means we should be able to potentially give Urshifu a run for its money by being able to resist both of Single Strike's stab options and half of Rapid Strike's stab options right there. As far as our damaging move options go, I like the idea of having the Psystrike here. It's a base 100 power attack that does calculate damage based off the physical defense, which means we can get around especially defensive walls that way. We have Expanding Force if we want to play Mewtwo next to an Indeedee and get the Psychic Terrain. We'll get a boost from the Psychic Terrain to power up Expanding Force, and Expanding Force will also become a spread move. With that choice specs, Mewtwo can potentially dent 2 targets at once with that Expanding Force, which is going to be great. We have Shadow Ball to get around Ghost types, and we have Aura Sphere here for the Dark types, so we don't have to worry about Shadow Ball and the Psychic type attacks doing nothing to a Dark type by having the Aura Sphere. Now, alternatively, you could drop one of the 2 Psychic type options. You could drop Expanding Force or Psystrike in favor of, say, Ice Beam, Flamethrower, any of the coverage options I talked about earlier on in the video. Another idea that I was thinking about too is a choice spec set. So just for case in point, I did drop the Expanding Force here for the Ice Beam. If we're going to run a choice Scarf set on Mewtwo, what I was thinking of is we're going to boost our speed up, throw a Timid Nature onto it to hit 187 points. We're going to go max investment into our special attack to bring us up to 206, and now we're relatively comparable to where we are before the choice specs from the previous set, with only a 4 points amount of difference, and then the rest is just divvied up into bulk between the HP and the defenses. Now, why 187? Well, Mewtwo, unfortunately, at base 130 speed, will never outspeed the likes of Iron Bundle or Fluttermane when they are max speed invested with a Protosynthesis or Quark Drive boost, but 187 does allow us to outspeed the fastest Pokemon of all without any base speed ability modifiers, and that is Reggie Lucky. With a Choice Scarf, Mewtwo hits 280 speed, which allows us to outspeed a max speed timid Reggie Lucky. Now, Reggie Lucky is not as heavily used in Scarlet and Violet as it was in Sword and Shield, but this is a nice benchmark to compare it to because this means Mewtwo is now going to outspeed anything that has base 200 or lower speed. With that 50% boost, the opponents have to get around Mewtwo by going for priority moves or Tailwind or Trick Room at this point. So Mewtwo is extremely fast and means it can do a lot of damage. As I mentioned with the Choice Spec set, you could run Terra Fairy on this for a defensive standpoint, but if you want to go all in, I would recommend going Terra Psychic on Mewtwo, and then your Psystrike now has double the boost from Stab. So happy hunting with that. A third idea that I was thinking of was a Life Orb set, and as far as some stats go, I just left it kind of blank here because you could kind of compare and contrast between the previous two sets and go for something like that. You could have the Life Orb here boost up your power of your attacks by a 30% boost at the cost of a little bit of your HP in recoil, but the nice thing here is you do have that 154 special attack and 130 speed working in your favor, which means Mewtwo is going to do some colossal amounts of damage regardless, and it allows Mewtwo to run Protect to keep itself safe. And this is also where you could potentially run Calm Mind instead of 3 damaging moves. If you want to run the Calm Mind here, you get a boost to both your special attack and your special defense. So now this 110 special defense without any investment is now getting 55 points from a +1 special defense boost, meaning you're sitting at 165 in the bare minimum. If you want to run some investment into your special defense, you certainly can. And then with your base 154 special attack at a +1, you are going to go up by a phenomenal amount of damage because you are going to have 261 points after that initial 50% modifier. And if your opponent lets you get the +2, well, now you're doubling both your special defense and your special attack. And that means your Psystrike is going to punish anything on the physical side, and your coverage option for the specially defensive Pokemon, well, or rather, I guess your physically defensive Pokemon, because Psystrike's handling the specially defensive Pokemon. Anyways, your other coverage option is going to decimate the non-special defensive walls right there. Now, alternatively too, if you wanted to, you could technically run an Assault Vest, and the Assault Vest could help you live some special attacks. If you want the pair of Wo-Chien next to this to help with the physical side, you might have something really gross there. I think that could be relatively funny at the end of the day. So that's what I was mainly thinking about Mewtwo. Let's talk about some potential partners that I think could be relatively nice to throw on a team with this thing. So starting off the list here for some good potential partners for Mewtwo, I think a solid case can be made for both forms of Indeedee. They each provide psychic terrain for Mewtwo, which means we don't have to worry about Sucker Punch finishing off Mewtwo, and we don't have to worry about any status moves that are boosted in priority thanks to Prankster, which means Mewtwo doesn't have to worry about any stat drops coming its way so long as it stays grounded on the psychic terrain, or so long as we don't have to worry about an Ice Spinner coming our way and removing the terrain. And alternatively too, a nice thing about Indeedee is it is a terrain setter, and since Miraidon is going to be allowed in this format, we can use Indeedee to override Miraidon's electric terrain. Indeedee, Rillaboom, and Galarian Weezing even all have their stocks increase a little bit because they are terrain setters, and since they are all naturally slower than Miraidon, you have a nice dynamic where the slower of the terrains gets to stay at the end of the day. So we would be able to override that electric terrain provided by Miraidon with Indeedee's psychic terrain, since the female Indeedee has 85 base speed, and the male Indeedee has 95 base speed, which is considerably slower than Miraidon's 135. But back to Mewtwo. Both Indeedees, regardless of whether it's male or female, get access to Helping Hand, which means they could give Mewtwo a 50% boost to Mewtwo's damaging moves, which is going to be relatively nice, and both get access to Trick Room. It is a miserable time for Mewtwo. It's probably the one thing that can rival the misery of going to the DMV here is having Mewtwo in Trick Room. So you can undo that Trick Room here with Indeedee, and then that way you don't have to worry about the speed stats being inverted. And if you want to deny Trick Room altogether, well, Indeedee gets access to Imprison. Imprison here allows it to just prevent your opponents from using any moves known by the user. So that could be really strong at the end of the day, especially on the ranked ladder, since that is a closed team sheet format. If you wanted to run the female Indeedee specifically, you could run max HP investment alongside 204 EVs into your special defense with a special defensive boosting nature. Here I have the sassy one on here to get this Indeedee a little bit slower, and then that way we don't have to worry about its speed tying with Rillaboom as well for grassy terrain versus psychic terrain, and then we just get the slower of the two terrains. With the Psychic Seed giving female Indeedee a 50% boost from that +1 special defense, you're sitting at 249 points for your special defense, which means any special attacks that it redirects, it's going to eat up and be asking for seconds, which is going to be great for Mewtwo, because alternatively you could run Calm Mind or a choice spec set on Mewtwo, and then Mewtwo can boost up its special attack with a Calm Mind, or just take advantage of the initial burst amount of damage from the choice specs and go for some big damage that way. If you want to run the male Indeedee though, what you could do is you could use this as a little bit of an offensive backup for Mewtwo here, since male Indeedee does get access to Expanding Force while female Indeedee no longer does get access to it. So male Indeedee being a little bit slower than Mewtwo could potentially finish off what Mewtwo starts with an initial Expanding Force thanks to the Psychic Terrain. Or alternatively, what you could do with male Indeedee is you could run a Choice Scarf on it, and then that way too you're getting that nice 50% boost to male Indeedee's speed, and then it can just start to do some damage to some things for Mewtwo to therefore finish up with its significantly higher special attack. But if you didn't want to run a choice item on the male Indeedee, some other moves you could do on it is you could use the Trick Room, as I mentioned, with the female Indeedee, but you could run Skill Swap. This can create a nice dynamic for your Pokemon, since Rillaboom or Miraidon or even Galarian Weezing could override your terrain. If you skill swap away your Psychic Surge to Mewtwo and get rid of pressure, well, Mewtwo will therefore immediately activate the Psychic Surge and then bring back the Psychic Terrain, which means it can then go for Expanding Forces once again. And one other thing too, going back to the Choice Scarf idea, male Indeedee does get access to Trick, so you could trick a Choice Scarf onto something that might want to set up, like say Raging Bolt with Calm Mind. You could potentially make it so that the Raging Bolt takes the Choice Scarf and now they're locked into whatever move they used. If you get lucky and they go for that Calm Mind, well, now they can't attack and have to switch out to be able to choose a new move, and that could be especially bad for your opponent in the late game situation where they might be down a Mon or two already. If it's down to 2 Mons at that point, well, you've eventually just locked out that setup sweeper right there. Now, alternatively to Indeedee in general, you could use Farigiraf as some good anti-priority thanks to its Armor Tail. Armor Tail protects both Farigiraf and its partner from priority attacks, so that could be really nice. You could use the Helping Hand on Farigiraf, and as I mentioned with the two Indeedees, you could use Trick Room on Farigiraf to cancel out opposing Trick Rooms. And plus, Farigiraf does have a higher special attack stat than male Indeedee, so if you wanted to have some more offensive coverage with Farigiraf backing up Mewtwo, you could use Hyper Voice paired with a Throat Spray to give Farigiraf a special attack boost, or you could use a Citrus Berry on this thing so that it gets back a little bit more HP. And then on the alternative side too, for denying priority, we could take advantage of priority and pair either Thundurus or Grimmsnarl next to Mewtwo. And the nice thing here with Grimmsnarl is you could use the combination of any of these moves, whether it be Light Screen, Reflect, Scary Face, or Parting Shot, to help support Mewtwo. Scary Face can cut down some faster Pokemon, especially if Tailwind is already on the field. So if your opponents boost their speed up with Tailwind, you could use Scary Face to cut down their speed, and then that gives Mewtwo a fair chance of being able to outspeed them. You could go for a combination of Light Screen or Reflect to boost up your defenses for your team overall, and then that way you're just having the amount of damage you're taking from either physical or special attacks. Or you could run Parting Shot, which can then be used to pivot Grimmsnarl out into something that maybe, say, has Fake Out or Intimidate, looking at you, Incineroar, since you have both of those. But alternatively, you could pivot into something else that could be used to pair nicely with Mewtwo, like, say, Indeedee. So as far as Thundurus goes, for some support for Mewtwo, you get access to both Eerie Impulse and Scary Face, which could be relatively good for keeping your opponent's stats in check. You can cut down the speed stat by 2 stages with Scary Face, and Eerie Impulse can be used to cut down the special attack 2 stages. Alternatively, too, if you're worried about Trick Room, you could just deny that with Taunt, which means Thundurus can just make it so that the opponent just doesn't get their status moves altogether. And alternatively, too, if you wanted to run, say, maybe Thunder or Hurricane, some kind of blasphemous combination with Mewtwo, you could run Rain Dance on Thundurus to make sure that Thunder or Hurricane become sure hits, or accuracy bypassing hits, and then you could also synergize that with Wild Bolt Storm off of Thundurus and potentially slow things down with the 30% chance to cause paralysis. That's what I was mainly thinking about some partner Pokemon. Overall, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this ramble about Mewtwo. I might not be a lawyer, but I hope I presented a good enough case to potentially use Mewtwo in Regulation G. And as I did with the Zekrom, I'm going to film a battle video featuring a Mewtwo team to come out after this one. Anyways, I will see you next time.